Daniel Sturridge says that it's probably his most prized possession. George Washington claimed it was impossible to govern the world rightly without it. Theodore Roosevelt said that understanding it thoroughly was better than a college education. Bob Marley was buried with it. His grave contained a stalk of marijuana, his red Gibson Les Paul guitar, and his Bible. Whatever you think of it, the Bible is the world's most unusual book. At the time of making this film, it's been translated into 670 languages, with the New Testament part of it available in 1521. It's still the world's bestseller, with total sales of 5 billion and over 100 million copies sold every year. And that doesn't count the 168,000 new Bibles that are given away free of charge by the Bible societies every single day. Why is it so important? Christians would say it's because the Bible is inspired by God. Inspired is the Greek word theopneustos, which literally means breathed out by God. In other words, the Bible isn't just another holy book. Its writer was God himself. You can see that attitude to the Bible in the way the Jewish people valued their scriptures down through the centuries. The great Jewish historian Josephus claimed that the Bible's prophets learned from God himself by inspiration. And you find the Bible itself repeatedly makes that claim about its own contents. Praise be to you, O Lord, teach me your decrees. With my lips I recount all the laws that come from your mouth. I rejoice in following your statutes as one rejoices in great riches. I meditate on your precepts and consider your ways. I delight in your decrees. I will not neglect your word. Now, you might well ask, how can the Bible be God's book when we know very well it was written by human beings? There are big differences between the style of different writers. Some write elegant Hebrew or polished Greek, and others are much more down to earth. The way that each book is written reflects the literary forms and methods of the century it comes from. There were at least 40 writers involved over a period of 1,000 years or more. So why pretend God had anything to do with it? Isn't it obvious that it's just another human production? Well, neither the Jews nor the early Christians ever denied that humans wrote the Bible. They didn't pretend it had just floated down from heaven on a miraculous piece of parchment. But they believed that when those humans wrote, God was guiding their words and expressions and working through their minds and their vocabulary to create a text which would give us a reliable, incomparable set of messages from God himself. And those messages would reveal to us the essential information we needed about who he was and what he was doing in this world. It wasn't that God sent the writers into a deep trance so that they were writing automatically without realizing it. And he didn't dictate it all to them word by word. No, many of the Bible books are obviously the result of intensive, conscious, human study and research. Luke, for example, who wrote one of the Gospels, the biographies of Jesus. He begins his book by talking about how he's worked hard to synthesize all the stories in circulation and the partial accounts that other people have written to produce a totally reliable version of the Jesus story. He sweated hard to produce his Gospel, and it took him every ounce of brain power at his disposal. But what Christians believe is that God was at work through Luke to produce a book which wouldn't just be a well-researched biography of Jesus, it would be God's own personal word to us as well. Of course, what this means is that the Bible is a cumulative revelation. God doesn't tell us the whole story in the very first book. He feeds the information through bit by bit, so that as the years pass and the successive parts of the Bible are written, we learn more and more as we're able to understand better and better. In Old Testament days, for example, there wasn't much understanding of what happens after you die. But the picture gradually became clearer bit by bit. And then when Jesus came along, well, Paul says that Jesus Christ brought life and immortality to light through the gospel. This means that the books written before Jesus don't speak clearly about the subject. And it took Jesus to explain that yes, there is life beyond death, and we're all going there, and the reason for his coming was to liberate us from the power of death and the grave. That doesn't mean the earlier books are useless or out of date or misguided. Oh no, every successive part of the Bible is another building block added onto a pretty solid foundation. We can still read any part of the Bible and encounter the voice of God in it. It never goes out of date. Well, that's what Christians claim anyway. But are they right? Does this idea make sense? A book that's both human and divine at the same time? Are there parts of the Bible that have lost their credibility in our scientific age? Let's talk about that for a few minutes now.